jumping back into reading module 2 from this test above. So again, this is going to be test 2 out of the 6 paper tests on College Board. This is going to be part 3 of reading module 2. We finished a lot of the harder reading questions. The hardest part of the reading passage, in my opinion, is going to be that like 10 to 16, 10 to 17, because it's going to be those longer reading problems, charts, etc. It looks like 17 is going to be the last one, and then we move on to grammar here. So let's knock out 17 here. So while attending school in New York, this person encountered few works by African artists in exhibitions. Despite New York's reputation as one of the best places to view art or contemporary art from around the world. So we understand this person's disappointment. They went to this place expecting, this reputation to be upheld, and were disappointed by kind of the lack of variety, right? This specifically about African artists being conveyed. So how are they going to remedy this, right? According to this art journalist, later in his career as a curator and art historian, he sought to remedy this deficiency, not by focusing solely on modern African artists, but by showing how their work fits into a larger context of global modern art. So this is everything. This sentence, you're usually going to find this sentence in most of these harder questions. This sentence means everything. We don't want to look for an answer that's just, oh, he did XYZ for African artists. No, he is taking works by African artists and he's fitting them into the global narrative, right? Probably comparing them with different artists, different countries, etc., right? So that's going to be our focus going into our answers. So I can't imagine how we would try to undermine this. So of course it's going to be, how do I support this claim? How do I continue this claim into my answers, right? So I start with A. Let's see what A says. Remember, some of these answers could be really dangerous because this is a more difficult problem. So as a curator of, I'm assuming this might be like an event in Munich, our artist organized a retrospective of Ghanaian sculptor, their work entitled That, one of the largest art exhibitions devoted to a black artist in Europe's history. So this answer sounds great, right? I understand that. These are going to be the harder questions. But right here, this phrase should be enough. His whole intent is not to devote these events, these exhibitions, to black artists. It was to help these black artists fit into the global context, right? So I know A is wrong. They're going to try to, the SAT creators are going to try to give us that push. If we devote it to this, we know that's not the answer. I'm going to scroll down. In B, we have in this exhibition, our artist and co-curator brought works by African artists, such as these two people, with pieces by major figures from other countries, including the US and Mexico. Check mark, right? This one is almost certainly my answer because they are emphasizing the African artist that they wanted to remedy that deficiency, but not by just solely focusing on them, but by bringing them into the context of other global artists, right? So B is perfect according to the prompt we were following. Again, if I was in a rush at this point, I would answer this, but also remember that not every question should take the same amount of time. Your vocab questions in the very beginning are probably going to be a little easier. Your reading from like 7, 8 up through 16, 17 are going to be the longest part of your test, and the grammar problems and even the evidence ones at the end are probably going to be a little easier. So it's okay if you're a little behind on time at this point. There's no rush. Just because we're practicing, we're going to go through C and D, but B sounds excellent here. So this guy's work as curator of this exhibition, movements in Africa. So I'm already getting red flags here that it might be too focused on that. Showed how African movements for independence following the Second World War, African artists such as this person and this person, right? So again, we're going to mark this one wrong because they're focusing solely on the African artists, where our main intent was to bring them into the broader global context of other artists. And finally, D, organized, again, African photographers, not to emphasize a particular aesthetic, but to demonstrate the broad. So they're trying to get us. That's a danger word. We like the word broad, in which African artists. So again, they're still just focusing on African artists, even though if it's a broad range of African artists, they're not including other countries or other artists from around the world. It's going to be B here. Really good question. So now here is a little bit of a relief. We get into these much shorter passages. These are going to be the grammar problems. While there still are very difficult ones, it's at least way less reading. Okay, so we'll jump into 18 here. It should be a few easy ones in a row. For thousands of years, people in the Americas blank. It sounds like it's going to be past tense because it's, you know, for thousands of years as opposed to now. So to use, have used, having used. I'm probably already going to emphasize B. Have used the bottle gourd, a larger bitter fruit with thick rind. So I don't think I need to go much further. To use would be like present future tense. Having used would be like current, or at least like past current. And then using would be current. So again, for thousands of years, they're already kind of emphasizing past tense. People in the Americas have used this device, right? So B, not too bad here. Number 19, let's see what we got. While many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more, assuming, you know, better, right? They say lifelike. Okay, so we have a lot of options here. Lifelike but versus lifelike pause. So I would probably group these two and then group these two. So a but is going to transition us in a different direction, right? So let's see if we want to transition in a different direction. So that would be if we start in a direction here, we end up going in a different direction. While many, and I'll go with B because it's the least punctuation. While many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more lifelike, others look to the past, developing titles with visuals inspired by the 8-bit games of the 80s and 90s. So again, are we already naturally transitioning, or do we need an extra button there, right? So now I'll compare A and B. Video game creators, while many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more lifelike, but others look to the past. So did you notice it there? There is already a word that is transitioning us, and that is going to be while. So we can eliminate A and D because while we are transitioning, we're going from making their graphics more lifelike to looking to the past, you know, the more retro games, the 2D scrollers. While is already transitioning us. While idea 1, here's idea 2 that's different than idea 1. This is our transition. We don't need but here, so we're going to go with B or C. So you might have noticed as I read through that, I kind of paused because we are transitioning between ideas. So I'm probably already going to answer C here, but let's emphasize this pause again. While many video game creators strive to make their graphics look ever more lifelike, others look to the past. So we want to pause there because while is a very odd transition. Even though it's at the beginning of the sentence, it's anticipating a transition in the center of our sentence. While idea 1, pause, idea 2, we go with C because that comma is helping us transition from future games to past games. Another excellent question. And I jump to number 20 here. Again, it looks like we got a couple more decent ones before. Those slanted underlines aren't going to be the hardest problems. I'm going to look ahead to see if we have really good ones. You'll see kind of like double underline, triple underline, really difficult ones. So these kind of seem like medium problems, which is great practice. So number 20 here. In the 50s, this guy named McVicker was struggling to keep his business afloat when his sister-in-law advised him to repurpose the company's product. Okay? So I can probably just skip honestly down to here. In addition, so they're already kind of setting us up. In addition, it's just going to continue my flow. It's a very easy transition. In addition, Zufall blank. So again, this is the person that advised. So I might have kind of given it away a little bit there. A lot of these passages are going to have parallels, especially the vocab ones in the very beginning. So Zufall advised. In addition, Zufall suggested. So it's the first thing I saw when I looked at my answers. Super easy. We're just going to match they not only match the subject for us, but we're going to match the tense of the verb. Zufall advised, Zufall suggested selling the product under this thing called Play-Doh, right? So A for that one. I don't even have to go through the rest. Not bad at all. Jumping back into number 21 here. So we have Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit, but she also dedicated herself to mycology, pause, the study of fungi. So this looks like it could be a really challenging one just because we see so many options. I see semicolon, I see period, I see open space, and I see a comma, right? These two being on the stronger side and these two being on the weaker side. So that's probably how I would pair them. But if you've seen my previous videos, then you know And again, if you want to throw this in the comments, if you have seen them test this on the SAT, I've seen thousands of practice problems. I have not seen them test this. They are not going to test semicolon verse period. So again, these are very similar. They can both separate two, independent clauses, two independent sentences. The difference being that a semicolon, you would separate two related ideas, where a period can separate two completely separate ideas. But I have not seen this in practice problems. So what you'll do is it works on tons of these practice tests. Anytime you see a semicolon and a period, consider them as equal. So since you can't have two correct answers, you cross both off. That really helps on some of these harder problems. Now that we know those two are crossed off, we can analyze open space versus a comma. So again, we usually test it with the less punctuation. So let's try it with C here. Dedicated herself to mycology, pause, the study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species. So this one, maybe you picked up on it, maybe you didn't. I feel like this one might be a little bit on the more medium or hard side for sensing that the pause we needed. When you read it with the pause, I think you're going to see it. So always contest, always try both. So when I try it with the pause, but she also dedicated herself to mycology, pause, the study of fungi, pause, more than 350 producing more than 350 paintings. So what is that called? When we have a double comma, so remember the comma's after fungi, so we still will read producing. So the study of fungi, now let me erase the one under producing. When I have double commas, it's going to emphasize that while it is helpful, it is an unnecessary, a not completely needed phrase. So if we read it without that, she also dedicated herself to mycology, producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed. The sentence works. It is really nice. If you didn't know what the definition of mycology is, that's why it's included. But when you have double commas, you are allowed to eliminate that phrase. If we eliminate this phrase, the sentence is still grammatically correct. So that's kind of more emphasis for why we want the comma. Not only do I want to pause because the study of fungi is an interruption, it is just this helpful interjection that we don't need, but it helps us kind of flow into producing more, right? It is a different statement. What's also nice is to kind of see the analogous nature of the double comma compared to the double hyphen. So this is going to be 95% of the time you see these double hyphens, it's going to be used like this. This phrase that's unnecessary, that can be eliminated, but is helpful, surrounded by double commas or surrounded by double hyphens. So D for this one, really good practice problem. And I'm going to jump up to 22. It looks like it's going to be, we got a couple decent ones in a row here. So let's try 22 next. So in assessing the films of this director, okay, so I'm already asking, right? What or who is assessing the films? And it's going to be, right? I glanced through my answers. It's not going to be Karassa's use. That's not the one who's assessing the films. There are many critics. You can't start with there are. I need to start with many critics. So again, if you've gone through some of my previous videos, you've seen these, what can be harder subject problems, because the subject problems, what I've seen is some of the answers can sound good, but there is one way to solve these. It's systematic. It's always the same. If they describe a subject in the previous sentence, we have to start our next, and I said sentence, clause before the comma. If they start our clause with describing a subject, after our punctuation, after our pause, we have to start with that subject. So who's doing the assessing? The many critics are. If you know what I'm talking about, the plastics one, very good example. King Henry, really good examples you'll see through test 1 through test 2. So A for this one, because we need to follow with the subject they're describing. I look at number 23. Again, a lot of good ones here. This is another really good one. So 23, we have the director of this program of this nation in Oklahoma helped produce the world's first indigenous language instructional app. I see a lot of punctuation, so let's be careful here. So we have a pause after app. Chickasaw Basic. So I see, okay, 2 semicolons, and let's just kind of highlight some differences here. So 2 commas. So maybe I would group these, and I would group these so far, right? So right there, Chickasaw Basic in 2009. So the first thing I have to do is that starting? Is this right here? Is this starting a new statement or is it continuing? The reason why I'm asking that is a semicolon is supposed to separate two independent clauses. So if that is a different statement, if I'm starting a new statement, semicolon's cool. If in 2009 is connected to that statement, a semicolon is way too strong of punctuation. That is a dependent clause, and we need a comma. And I'm saying comma because that's my only other option in C and D. So in 2009, if I continue Chickasaw TV in 2010, so if Chickasaw TV is in 2010, it looks like the Chickasaw Basic is going to be in 2009. So it is connected. We can't use semicolons here because that's too much of an interruption, right? This is all together. So that makes it much easier. Now I'm comparing semicolon to comma. So I love how these problems are kind of like, you could say they're analogous to some math problems where it's like a slope problem and it's like these two have this slope, these two have this slope, get rid of those two, these two now have a different y-intercept, you know? So it's like process of elimination. Now we want to challenge, when would we ever have a semicolon listed after this date? And then I look through the rest of my passage. That's going to really help us. Another semicolon after 2010 and then a period after 2015 because it's the end of my sentence. We're already thinking parallel, right? If we want to keep this parallel, this comma is not only not going to be strong enough to separate items in a list. See, don't always just associate colons with lists. Semicolons are going to separate items in a list, right? When you have multifaceted items, because it's a program and a date, program and a date, program and a date. So these semicolons are helping us separate these multifaceted items, right? And again, really the easiest way to look at this is just, I have a semicolon, I have another one after this date, I just match it. That's all. So C for this one, excellent practice problem. Jumping back into number 24 here, we have these geothermal springs of Arkansas National Park are sourced via this process in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth, pause. So remember, these are most often going to be kind of seen as like brief pauses, just like commas, right? And 95%, again, I'm going to write that down for you, about 95% of the time, it's going to be followed by another double hyphen, right? Just like those comma problems where it's comma, comma, usually meant to kind of exemplify a phrase, or again, most likely that it's unnecessary but helpful, something we could delete. So I glance at my answers, and I'm probably going to start with C, because 95% of the time, it's going to be followed by another double hyphen. Let's try it with this. So downward through the earth, pause. In this case, the porous rocks of the hills around hot springs, pause, to collect in a subterranean basin. Let's try eliminating that phrase. Let's see if it still functions grammatically. In which rainwater percolates downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. We're good to go. It was, again, the most often case where it's kind of like those double commas. So this works. Yeah, a really good rule to look out for these ones. Again, what is that maybe 5% of the time where it's not used with another double hyphen? And that's going to be when it's used at the very beginning of a passage. So maybe like you would see one up here, or you would see one down here. And it would be by itself. And it would actually function, when it's by itself, it functions more like a colon. So think of if they had a independent clause, colon, dependent clause, maybe using it for like an emphasized pause to exemplify a conclusion, or again, if it was the beginning, to exemplify an introduction, a hook, maybe missing a subject or a verb. That's why it wouldn't be like an independent clause. It can be used exactly like that. So if you see a problem where the option for a double hyphen is by itself, think of it like a colon. It's going to be attached to a dependent clause at the beginning or end. 95% of the time, it's going to be in pairs like this problem, and it's going to act like double commas, where it is a deletable phrase, an unnecessary phrase. And we'll probably finish with 25 here. Let's go ahead and see what we got. Number 25, we have, over 20 years ago, in this landmark experiment, this professor set up a jam tasting booth at a grocery store. Cool, we got some intro. The number of jams available for tasting varied. Okay, so maybe since I see 2 whiles, let's go with this first to see if we could eliminate it. So remember what while is going to do. We talked about one earlier. While is going to take statement 1, while statement 2. So it's going to be on the same plane. While Jimmy was practicing for baseball, Deborah was practicing for her test. But it's going to be different. So same plane, different context. So the number of jams available for tasting varied, while the number of breads were all the same. They were monotonous, right? So that would be a good example of where C or D would fit. Let's see if it's something similar to that. For tasting varied, while some shoppers had 24 different options, others only 6. Red flag. While is only going to compare 2 statements. It could be while statement 1, statement 2, like we saw earlier, or it could be statement while statement 2, or sorry, statement 1 while statement 2. What's happening here? The number of jams available for tasting varied. Some shoppers had 24 options, others only 6. 3 statements. You're never going to use while with more than 2 statements or less than 2 statements. It's always going to be 2. So again, another kind of math approach where we can eliminate the 2 options. Now we're testing colon versus comma. And again, this is finally going to be the opportunity where you get to use the colon in the way that you probably are most familiar with, a list. If I put a colon here, some shoppers had 24 options, others only 6. It's a short list. The second part is much shorter than even the first part of the list, but it is a list. A lot of the lists that I see on the SAT, on these practice tests, are actually only 2 items. So don't think you're going to get these grocery store shopping lists of like 10 different things, subsequently after a colon. A lot of the ones I've seen are only 2 items listed, but it's still a list. So I'm going with A because we want this pause here before a list. And again, a comma is only going to be a brief pause. A comma is not appropriate grammatically to anticipate a list, right? A for this one, great problem. I will upload one final part to this, and we'll be done with practice test number 2.